I'm not gonna lie, I am so over the amount of work I had to put into post-processing to make this footage actually look decent. If only I could just snap my fingers and get a new camera. Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel. We have another episode this week, and I promise that this video is going to be a lot shorter than the previous videos that I've had up until this point. It's not that I don't have plenty of content to cover. In fact, honestly, I've learned quite a bit about photography and videography, but I would never consider myself to be an expert by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I am, because I don't want to embarrass myself. But that said, I'm going to go ahead and fill you in on my new purchase, and you probably noticed the quality change in the intro clip, and that's my new camera. Recently I picked up a Panasonic Lumix G7. Now the G7 is actually a different camera than the D50-100. The D50-100 is a digital SLR, and the Lumix G7 is actually a mirrorless camera, so there is no single lens reflex at all involved, making them very different. I went with the mirrorless camera because I just couldn't justify the cost, considering what I was going to be using it for. Alright, so forewarning, YouTube wasn't the only reason that I bought a new camera, although that did play a role into it. The biggest reason would have been my son. My wife and I had been using our cell phones to go ahead and take video and take pictures of our kid the past year, and we're slowly running out of storage on our phone. Now, not only that, I know people love their iPhones, but I've never been a huge iPhone fanboy. I do love Apple products, as I've talked in some previous videos, but the iPhone was just not something I really kind of got into. I have a Pixel 2 XL, so it's actually a couple years old, but if you look at quality of pictures from my phone versus my wife's phone, it's drastic. Now you're probably wondering, like, well, didn't you buy the 5100? No, I actually did not. I'm borrowing it from somebody, and I have been for the past few years. Shout out to Matt. Matt, thank you so much. Maybe you even forgot they've had it up until this point, but you are going to get it back soon, because Matt's actually going to gift me 2 Power Mac G5s. Yeah, like I need more, but it is what it is. Honestly, the D50-100 is a pretty stout little camera, but the situation is that it's grown long in the tooth. You saw the frustration of my intro clip is real. The amount of post-processing required to make footage from that camera look decent really does take a very long time, not only for me to go through, but then also to render and then export as a video. I just was a little over it, and so I started researching, and even at that point I was like, do I really want to buy a new camera just for YouTube? I don't suggest anybody just getting into YouTube for fun like I am now to go out and spend a ridiculous amount of money on a camera just so you get good footage. Honestly, go find yourself a used camera, or in my case a free camera, get used to the settings, try to make things as best as you can, and then from there, when you feel like you've learned a lot and you've maxed out its potential, maybe you move on from there. With that said, let's talk about the specs, because obviously the quality's better, but there's got to be a reason for it other than the fact it's newer. The crazy part is that the G7 isn't that much newer. The G7 isn't actually a 5-year-old camera at this point. It was released in 2015, but the D50-100 was released in 2011. And when we're talking camera and video technology evolution, 4 years doesn't seem like a lot of time, and for all intents and purposes, in a regular time span, it's probably not. But when we talk the decade of 2010 to 2020, a lot changed. If you need a quick refresher, 2010, we were just getting in. I just started teaching. HD TVs were really becoming popular. My classroom was brand new when I started, and it had I believe 1080i plasma TV, which was high-end for the time, and at home I think I had a 720p, like 32-inch Insignia TV. So the situation is 2011, 1080p at 30 frames per second was pretty good, which is the max that the D50-100 can do. Flash forward 4 years, all of a sudden 4K was a huge part of the conversation, and so the G7 actually does 4K at 30 FPS. Now, you could get a 4K camera that does 60 FPS today. I know 8K cameras are starting to weasel their way into the consumer marketplace. But again, when we talk cost for my use, it definitely wasn't worth it. Honestly, I wasn't even looking for 4K. I had the ability to edit in 4K, but I'm probably not going to actually go ahead and export in 4K and upload at this given moment, just because I just don't know if it's worth it. That said, being able to record in 4K and then go ahead and downsize it into 1080p, which is what you're seeing right now, gives me a lot of pixels to go ahead and play with. So that's really what I'm probably going to do. Now, I'm not going to lie, 4K footage, it's crazy how much space it takes up. The G7 is approximately, I think it's like a gigabyte for every 2 minutes of video. So when you're talking a 20-minute video, you're racking in 10 gigs of storage, whereas the D5100 was probably 200 to 300 megabytes per 2 minutes of video at the 1080p 30 FPS. So there's give or take there, but the ability to go ahead and edit video and get a higher quality footage to then go ahead and work with in post-processing is going to make my life significantly easier. Now, in case you're wondering, when I talk post-processing, how much effort do I really have to put in? Here's what the 4K video looks like, unedited but shrunk down to 1080p. Now, here's what the D5100's 1080p 30 FPS video looks like, completely unedited with nothing else done. Now, I know some of you are probably sitting there going like, well, decrease the ISO you're set at, or you got to go ahead and adjust white balance. I've adjusted white balance. I'm running at an ISO of anywhere from 400 or less, depending on what I'm looking at with the D5100. This is what I get. Now with the G7, I'm running at an ISO level around 1600, and I'm doing that so I can get some good lighting levels out of the video because my lighting downstairs isn't the greatest. Whereas with the D5100, 400 is pretty much the max I can use in order for me not to start to get a ton of grain. And you've probably seen some of that in my earlier film because I needed to increase the ISO because I didn't have the lighting that I did now. Regardless, it is a much better camera despite the fact that it's pretty much the same megapixel rating. It's a 16 megapixel camera on both ends. But the CMOS sensor, from what I understand for video in the D5100, is the limiting factor when it comes to the Nikon. Whereas the G7, there is no differentiation between the CMOS that's being used between videography and photography. So I get pretty much the same picture quality regardless. Whereas the Nikon is definitely the better film camera, even though it's not using film. It's not so good as far as the video is concerned. Now, with all that said, the G7 is going to be my primary rig for video. I'm going to hold on to the D5100 as long as Matt allows me to, and I'll use that as a secondary camera. The D5100 is a good camera for macro shots. Now, it does require some work in post-processing, but I've got so many of those presets set in Adobe Premiere at this point, it's kind of just drag and drop and edit from there, render and go. Whereas the G7, honestly, it doesn't require a lot of attention other than pretty much brightness and contrast. That's going to wrap up this video. Thank you so much for dropping by. Expect some more content in the near future and some higher quality content on that now that I have the new camera. If you like what you saw, please go ahead. Make sure you go ahead and hit that like button. Please subscribe. I've left some links down so you can go ahead and you can see both cameras on Amazon, although I honestly don't suggest buying either of these cameras new at this point. If you can help it, try to find them used someplace on eBay, especially something like the D5100, which I'm pretty sure at this point is discontinued, and the price is just obnoxious for any of the new models, and kind of happens with new old stock with old technology. But until next time, I'm going to go ahead and keep doing my thing, and then I'll see you later. You know why? Because I'm in 4K, so it cuts my head off a little bit. So,